Hello everyone, this is CounterYolo, bringing you another video in Star Trek Online. And in today's video, I'm going to revisit a classic video that I did a while ago and is bringing it up to more modern standards and also to just give some extra stats for you all. To make it more interesting, I'm going to be doing it in a different way. Last time I did it based upon the different factions inside the game: Federation, Klingon, Around the Republic, and cross-faction fully. This time I'm going to be addressing the 3 different Starship classes and their various 6 subclasses for each in terms of the specializations in the game. So I'll be going through generally what that means, and then to each class specifically, and then a TLDR at the end, just like the last video. Feel free to see the time links in the description to skip around throughout the video as well. With that, let's go ahead and get started. So as you can see here, we've gotten a bunch of new starships since the last time I did this video. At least from what I could tell, there's about 251 starships in the game as of making this video as of March 14th, 2020. And we have 3 general classes of starships. We have cruisers, escorts, and science vessels. Cruisers have Commander Engineering, escorts have Commander Tactical, and science vessels have Commander Science. And like last time, we have 6 different subvariants for each one of them. We have the standard version, the balanced version, the dreadnought version, the flanking version that's more for PvP, the version with 1 hangar bay, and the version with 2 hangar bays. And before, I just had this as a big list of just the 6 different types. This time, I've organized it into 2 different themes. Basically, the 3 that definitely don't involve hangars at all in starships, and then the 3 that do involve hangars. The 2 with hangar bays, and then the flanking version, which can sometimes also be found as a frigate option for the hangar bays in your hangar starships. So those are the 2 different types. Also on each slide, there's going to be 6 kind of columns. There's 5 specializations in the game for space, as well as 1 extra column for all of those endgame tier 6 starships that don't have any commander specialization seating. With that, let's go ahead and go through all of this. I've had this video before just showing in general what it is for each one of the 3 main classes. Because this is boring and doesn't make as much sense, here's the actual average stats of all of those ships combined. If we were going to say, hey, here's a composite ship based upon the averages of all the ships, this is what we would come up with. For cruisers, they average at a 1.42 hull ratio, 1.14 shield ratio, an 8 for a turn rate, 39 inertia, and a 0.15 impulse. Escorts are on average quite a bit more maneuverable, but they have some punishment in terms of their durability. They have a 1.12 hull, a 1.07 shields, 15 turn, 64 inertia, and 0.2 impulse. Science vessels are kind of in the middle in terms of durability. They have a 1.099 hull, 1.37 shields, 12.5 turn, 55 inertia, and 0.18 impulse. Even though, yes, science vessels on average have a much higher shield ratio, because if you actually just average hull and shields together, they are less durable than cruisers overall in terms of all that stuff. And escorts, because their theme is just doing as much damage as possible instead of relying upon any sort of base stats for survival, that's why their hull and shields are still fairly low. Even though, yes, their hull on average is higher than their shields. That's why the 1.12 hull ratio is higher than the 1.07 shields. The other special things about these 3 different classes: cruisers almost always have some sort of cruiser command available to them. Science vessels almost always have a secondary deflector, which is where a lot of their DPS comes from. And then escorts, they don't have anything like that, but every single subvariant of escorts have access to dual cannons and dual heavy cannons. There is a variant of science vessels and a variant of cruisers that cannot use dual cannons. Escorts can all use dual cannons. If you see a ship with Commander Tactical, you can always count on them to be able to use dual cannons and to think of a dual cannon based build to use with those types of starships. For the other ones, you have to look and see, is it the right subtype that I can use that type of weapon with? If not, then you have to basically stick with torps and beams, or use the lackluster single cannons, as I've talked about in a previous video. All right, so in this first part, we'll go over cruisers. As I said earlier in this video, we'll be going over this based upon the different specializations in the game. As we can see here right off the bat, we don't have any pilot cruisers in the game, although to some extent that makes sense. We do have 2 frigates now, so it would have been nice if one of the frigates had commander pilot, because that would make sense thematically. But anyway, these are just kind of what it comes down to. In terms of the specializations, as you can see here, command, mirror worker, and temporal operative are all relatively equally represented in terms of the rough specializations. And then we still have like half of the starships that don't have any commander specialization seating on them. When it comes to standard cruisers, I'm also showing the mastery package for each one of these, by the way. Standard cruisers typically get a lot of damage resistance rating inherently in their mastery package, which also makes it so that if you fly one of these ships, you don't have to put dedicated damage resistance rating consoles on your ship, because you basically already have one built into your ship itself. Additionally, you have extra HP regen per 3 seconds, which is important. A lot of regen stuff inside the game applies every 6 seconds, like shield regen, for instance. This HP regen is per 3 seconds. Additionally, it gets an extra 10% whole HP. Additionally, above whatever the actual shield ratio is actually going to be for the ship. These cruisers get access to all 4 cruiser commands. Weapon system efficiency, which helps with weapon power cost reduction for your weapons. Shield frequency remodulation, which helps with shield resistance and shield regeneration. Strategic maneuvering, which helps with your turn rate and speed. And then a command attract fire, which gives you slightly more damage resistance rating, but more importantly, increases your threat and decreases the threat of your allies that are within its radius. If people are outside of the radius, then command attract fire doesn't work. So that's why a lot of tanks just don't use it, because they just don't want to bother with that radius and coordinating with their team to make that work properly. As for the actual base stats here, I'm showing here the actual base stats of the actual cruiser in every single other variant throughout these slides. And I'll also show its change versus the average of all of the of that particular type combined. So as you can see here, the whole shield and impulse about on average. It's got a little bit lower turn and a little bit higher inertia, but still the inertia is still on average pretty low for cruisers. So these guys are still going to slide if you try to turn really hard on them, and you aren't going to be expecting a lot of turning out of these guys at all. They have high hull HP in all of the cruiser commands, so in terms of general flexibility, they are there. They do not have access to dual cannons or dual heavy cannons. And the other weakness for them is that they are about as durable as dreadnought cruisers, but of course, dreadnought cruisers have access to dual cannons and a hangar base. So in terms of that overall, a lot of players don't like cruisers as much. It's also why there have been very few cruisers released recently, just because, well, why give us a cruiser when you could give us a dreadnought cruiser, which is generally speaking just a cruiser but better. So these are all the cruisers in the game at the moment. The most recent ones were from the recent Legendary Anniversary Bundle, with our 2 Miracle Worker cruisers in there, and then the Legendary Ross in there as well. We also have our Sea Star Miracle Worker Cruiser Mega Bundle in there, Miracle Worker ships, a couple of Temporal Operative ships, and then a bunch of ships over there that don't have any specialization seating whatsoever. Of those ones that are of note, now obviously the 3 Sea Star flagship cruisers are all pretty good because of the flagship 3-piece and 2-piece for relative mid-level DPS if that's what you're looking for. Also of note is that the Temporal Light Cruiser and the Walker Light Exploration Cruiser are the only 2 cruisers in this cruiser subcategory that have 5 weapons in the front and 3 in the back. All the rest of them here are 4 in the front, 4 in the rear. However, because, I mean, unless you're going to be doing a dual beam bank build with this cruiser subtype, that's not going to matter too much to you. If you're going to do dual beam bank and use a regular cruiser, those are the ones that you would go for, because then you can get 2 Omnis in the back plus like a turret and not have to worry as much about, you know, firing on the sides or the rear. And I'll talk about that in a different video too. The next subclass is battle cruisers. Generally speaking, this is one of the better DPS options for you for cruisers. You lose that extra HP regen, but get an extra 15% crit severity, just naturally on your Starship too. You also lose Commander's Tracked Fire, but you gain access to dual cannons. So you get a lot more maneuverability with the cost of lowering your hull by a little bit, and you still don't have access to any hangar bays on the ship. But if what you're about is just doing energy-based damage and having reasonable survival behind it, battle cruisers are a fantastic option. When it comes to them overall, obviously the Miracle Worker battle cruisers are the big standouts. Of course, we have the new Section 31 battle cruiser, which I've already mentioned in a different video, my personal opinions on that. And then we have a few from Intel, a few from Temporal Operative, and then there are a bazillion battle cruisers over there. My favorite in there is obviously the Not Cruel Akros battle cruiser, just because it can use the fun, gimpy Not Cruel console, which can make you immune to damage for up to 25% of the time. It's a fun console that also gives you crit severity, so that's why I like that ship a lot, and why I've been experimenting quite a bit with that one actually in the past couple of months, doing some weird, wacky things with it in terms of tanking and such. There are lots of good options in here. The Racing Kittimer Alliance battle cruiser is fine as well for torp-based DPS. If you want to do it for that and like its registry, then go for it. In terms of Dreadnought cruisers, you lose some of your damage resistance to get some extra crit chance, which is still nice. And overall, your big downsides is just that you lose a little bit of turn and inertia versus normal, and you lose 2 of the cruiser commands, the shield one and the engine one. Generally speaking, when I've talked to most players in the game, most of them either use weapon system efficiency, or if they're going to tank, maybe they'll use Commander's Tracked Fire. And this ship has both of those, so you could argue that this ship has the 2 best cruiser commands in the game. So you're not really losing much in terms of the cons. You still have a relatively high hull HP. You get a hangar bay. You can still use dual cannons, and so this is still a fantastic ship. Now, with the buff to flight deck cruisers, them being flight deck carriers and having 2 hangar bays, some people still would say that these are going to be slightly inferior to those at the moment. But these are still fantastic ships. Now, the 2 biggest actually 3 biggest standouts would be the Styx for tanking. It's one of the best offensive-based tanks in the game because of its awesome hangar pets. The Kelvin Vengeance is also pretty good in that regard too, but it's more of a DPS-based type of thing. But it has started to lag behind more recent additions. The Kronos Dreadnought Cruiser is one of the better ones from the C-Store. And of course, we have the legendary flagship Dreadnought Cruiser, the new Verities subtype, which is awesome too. There are lots of other ones inside the game too. Most of them I'm not a particularly big fan of, but they do exist nonetheless. So you're welcome to look through a lot of those at your own choosing. When it comes to frigates, these are the average stats we have right now. We only have 2 frigates in the game at the moment, and one is from promo packs and one is from events. Now, because promo pack ships are generally have more stats than regular ships do, and because event ships are generally big lackluster overall versus normal ships, this average probably is going to be about what we're going to be expecting for regular frigates going forward, whenever they actually decide to give us a regular normal frigate inside the game. For its mastery package, we lose some of our damage resistance rating to get some extra crit severity and extra accuracy, which is nice. Oh, they actually takes out your extra hull HP as well. So that extra impact of losing almost 25% of the hull versus an average cruiser will be felt even more because you don't have that extra mastery package element that passively gives you even more extra HP. Now, the strengths for frigates, though, is that again, they're a cruiser with access to dual cannons. They have the highest mobility of any cruiser in the game, and this is the variant with access to raider flanking, but they still have access to 8 weapons. All the other frigates in the game have 1 weapon less than the maximum for that subtype. Raiders only have 7 weapons, and scout ships only have 6. So that is what you're getting with this. You get a full 8-weapon layout with Raider flanking. It's just that you have the lowest durability of any cruiser in the game. Now, they're still fine. None of them have any specialization seating. If you want to fly them, feel free to fly them. They're both hard to access. One was earned through a previous event, and one's earned through promo packs on a Federation captain. So hard to get and fly either way. When it comes to flight deck carriers, which is the next category, these originally were called flight deck cruisers. If you watched that previous video, you would note that I basically said, well, these can be considered basically dreadnought cruisers, but worse, because at that point they only had one hangar bay, and they could not use dual cannons. And their defensive cruiser command layout meant that unless you're going to really be going for tanking, you probably didn't want to pick this ship. Now with access to dual cannons and access to 2 hangar bays instead of just 1, while nothing else has really significantly changed on the ship too much, it's actually a decent option. As long as you weren't really reliant upon the weapon system efficiency for extra weapon power cost reduction, you can still use a shield frequency modulation to make your hangar pets survive a little bit better. The stats are still about average, but I mean, an average statted ship with 2 hangar bays is still a reasonably good ship overall inside of this game. Besides the Herald Wasp flight deck carrier, I'm actually a fan of basically every single one of these flight deck carriers now inside the game. Now, I'm not going to fly the promo Merc Worker flight deck carriers unless Cryptic accounts unlock Starships from the exchange, but the rest of these ships I have flown. All the rest of them I've flown, and I'm a fan of all of them, even though obviously certain ones like the Cardassian one has their weaknesses in terms of the bridge offshore layout. They're all good, solid ships. They're ones that I can highly recommend for any of you all to fly, and you would enjoy flying them. In terms of engineering carriers, these are the most inconsistent of all the different subtypes inside the game. That's why we aren't even showing a mastery here, because yeah, it's interesting. The Vorgon carrier is basically the carrier mastery for a science carrier. The Herc dreadnought carrier is basically the mastery of your tactical dreadnought carriers, and then the 4/4 promo carriers have their own unique mastery too. And those particular 4/4 ones have those offensive cruiser commands. It's only the 4/4 one. The 4/3 and 3/3 engineering carriers do not have access to any cruiser commands whatsoever inside the game. Now, the big standouts for these ships is that they have the highest HP on average of any subclass in the entire game. If what you're about is just having a stupidly large amount of hull, and you're trying to do a record for the highest hull available on a starship in the entire game, these are the ships you're going to choose. With their inconsistencies and with their other issues, this is why I'm probably going to be making another video talking about how to rebalance the Starship subclasses. Those 2 other ships in particular, the Herc ship and the Vorgon ship, definitely need something else going for them to be basically viable inside the game right now. The Temporal dreadnought cruisers, which are honestly carriers, but they just haven't changed the name, are actually fine. They're a little bit lackluster versus the current flight deck carriers, but they are decent ships well enough. Okay, so for our next category, we're going to be talking about escorts. We have about 100 of these ships as well. As you can see here right off the bat, mostly the commander specializations available here are pilot and temporal operative. Temporal operative is in basically all of them, but 24 out of the 25 pilots specialization seating for commander is in escorts. They're predominantly here, also predominantly in the general escort category. So that's also another interesting fact there. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started with this. For standard escorts, the way that they work is that you have 7 regular weapons, and then you have 1 experimental weapon. The experimental weapon works a little bit differently than other weapons. Most weapon enhancements, like beam fire will, cannon scatter volley, don't affect experimental weapons. So it is something you need to keep in mind. It's just an extra weapon that fires alongside your other weapons. Most of the time, experimental weapons also aren't a part of sets as well in the game either, so that is another downside. In terms of the regular mastery package, it's extra accuracy, defense, extra kinetic and energy damage, and extra critical chance. And again, with every single escort in the game, if it has Commander Tactical, it has access to dual cannons no matter what. So you don't have to worry about that. If you're choosing a Commander Tactical Starship, it will be able to use dual cannons and dual heavy cannons, no problem. In terms of standard escorts overall, basically what it comes down to is that if you want high maneuverability for a starship, but don't want to lose a weapon slot over having super high maneuverability, these are going to be your best options for you. If you want something faster than this or turns better, you're going to be wanting a Raider or something like that. If you still want your 8 weapons and have high maneuverability, these are going to be your options. Part of it is because we have 2 pilot escort mega bundles from the C store that have significantly skewed our base stats here of turn, impulse, and inertia. But I mean, there's also the Rising Pilot Corvette, which is a regular escort, which is the fastest ship in the game. Also, I have the regular Rising Corvette and a couple of other fantastic ships in here too. Yeah, it's up to you whether you want to use those. I mean, the Rising Corvette alongside its stats, I mean, just by the looks, it's my favorite ship for just raw looks inside the game. The Sovereign is still the ship that I still call my ship, but my favorite looking ship and customizable ship is going to be the Rising Corvette, just the way that it is for me inside the game. But yeah, when it comes to destroyers and warships, which is our next subtype, you lose your defense and your mastery package to get extra crit severity. So when it comes to all the mastery packages inside the game, this is your most offensive mastery package available inside the game. Basically, if Cryptic gave us an extremely optimal and legitimately optimal layout for a warship inside the game, you probably couldn't get people off of flying that ship to fly a different ship. Just the mastery package is pretty much the best for energy-based and torpedo-based damage inside the game. The raw stats are fine too. You lose a little bit of turning and inertia, which is also why you see most of your temporal commander temporal things here, so that extra offensive temporal operative option, which gives you extra turning, counteracts that loss of turning inertia that you're losing to be a warship or destroyer instead of a regular escort. That's why you see most of the temporal stuff here, in my opinion. Of course, we have the legendary Defiant Warship, which is a really fun ship too. Especially just a higher HP pilot Ajax from the C Store Mega Bundle. That's a warship instead of an escort. We have a bunch of ones from the exchange as well. They don't have a commander specialization seat. Obviously, a lot of them are pretty good too. A couple of them have doubled lieutenant commander seatings, so some of them aren't entirely slouches. As was noted to me from the last video, the Amari Smuggler's Heavy Escort is actually a destroyer. I did not realize that, so, well, at least in terms of like the Starship Mastery and such. So that ship is here as well. And of course, we have our Fleet Veteran Destroyers, which, if you're wanting a cool starship for the looks, the Federation one is freaking awesome, and so is the Gemini Vanguard one. When it comes to Juggernauts, we have 5 Juggernauts in the game at the moment. 2 ones by name and 3 from the C Store before it was really a thing. And so with the Ramen starships, the master package is going to be a little bit different. But in terms of the other standard ones, this is what the master package is. You get extra crit chance and crit severity, extra energy damage, and you lose that accuracy to get extra HP regen per 3 seconds. And when you look at the stats here versus average escorts, it's pretty abysmal in terms of its maneuverability, and it's really good in terms of its raw durability in terms of hull and shields. Basically, this is just a cruiser with Commander Tactical, and it's still durable. That's basically what Juggernauts generally are. And so yeah, it's basically an escort that pilots like a cruiser, but it still has the damage of an escort. So that's why a lot of people like the juggernauts at the high end. I mean, not to mention the Vodwar juggernaut is a miracle worker ship, and it's got very strong bridge officer seating for the DPS playstyles inside the game. I think it'd be cool if Cryptic eventually added better ones for DPS that had much lower HP, so people could actually start deciding between, do I want a more cozy starship that's easier to survive in, or do I want the actual pure highest DPS ship? Right now, the Vodwar Juggernaut is one of the best DPS ships in the game, if not the best in terms of energy damage. So that's why it's there. The Liberated Board Juggernaut is definitely more for a tanking playstyle more than for a DPS playstyle. But also, I mean, for RP reasons, a Liberated Borg ship is still pretty awesome too. And then we have our classic Flagship Dreadnought Warbirds here too, that in everything other than name are Juggernauts as well. When it comes to Raiders, keep in mind there are various names for Raiders inside the game. If you have a Federation Raider, it's going to be called a Light Escort. If it's a Klingon Raider, it's going to be called a Bird of Prey. And if it's a Raider from anyone else, it's generally just going to be called a Raider. Technically, the Romulans do not have any Raiders in the game at the moment, although there are 3 ships that have an enhanced battle cloak that I'm going to be considering Raiders for this video. You're welcome to just consider them regular escorts for your own personal lists. I think that especially, with the recent Picard episode a few weeks ago, I think, when they mentioned that, hey, there's an old Romulan Bird of Prey, and they basically showed a Tallis right there. So, I mean, in my opinion, the Tallis, Tavaro, and Fayette all should just be Raiders. They should all just get Raider flanking and it be done with. But that's just me. When it comes to regular Raiders, as I mentioned, well, I probably forgot to mention here, but normal Raiders lose 1 weapon slot. They still have the experimental weapon, but they lose a regular weapon. So they're either going to be 4 weapons in the front and 2 in the back, or they're going to be 5 weapons in the front and 1 in the back. The 5-1 plus experimental layout is what you're going to be ideally wanting, but you do lose a lot of durability to get an extreme amount of maneuverability. These are the most maneuverable ships in the game overall. So yeah, here's what they are. A lot of people do like the Maquis Raider a lot just because it's the cheapest tactical miracle worker starship in the game. It is from the Lobi store, but its pricing is a little bit higher than what you would expect because not only do people buy this ship because they want a budget juggernaut ship, but also because people buy this ship because they like the console off of it for exotic base builds. So two different types of players buy that ship, so its pricing is going to be a little bit higher. In terms of the ships here, the Fayette is a super cool ship. It's not meta, but it's a cool looking ship, and that's why it was in a Star Trek Picard comic, because it's a cool looking ship. The Fleet Burrell Bird of Prey is another ship that has an enhanced battle cloak, so that's something that should be of note to you all. Some of these other ships perform really well too. When it comes to Strikewing escorts, their magic powers is the exact same for regular escorts. As you can see here, for the change to average escorts, they're basically average in terms of their stats, which should be noteworthy because regular escorts had very high maneuverability. These ships don't. Slightly higher hull, but other than that, they're basically average in terms of their raw stats. So that is what you're losing to get that extra hangar bay on a regular escort. You're losing a lot of that maneuverability, and none of these ships in the game at the moment actually have a commander specialist seat. Maybe Cryptic thinks that would be too powerful and too OP in the game if they gave a Strikewing escort access to any commander specialist abilities. Oh, and also in the last video when I talked about this, I called these flight deck escorts. And that was because a few of them were called flight deck, and so that's what I decided to call them here too. They are making a distinction between different classes now, so, and they renamed these Strikewing escorts, so that's what I'm sticking with now too, because that's what the correct terminology is now. They weren't consistent with that last year. As for our last big starship for tactical is called Dreadnought Carriers. Now they also only have 7 weapons in the same way that Raiders do, except instead of losing a regular weapon, the Dreadnought Carriers just lose the experimental weapon, which in some ways is actually less of a nerf in terms of the damage than losing a regular weapon, but that's up to you all to decide on there. In terms of the mastery package itself, though, it is a nerf in terms of damage. Only the kinetic and energy damage has remained. All the other stuff with crit chance, crit severity has left, and instead you get extra hull and shield HP, and then you get the regular hanger mastery thing of extra launch speed and rank up on your pets. In terms of your Dreadnought Carriers, just like most of the other Dreadnoughts in the game, you have really high hull and shields, and you lose a ton on your turning and impulse and inertia. And again, just like the Juggernauts, these things pilot like a cruiser. Now, in terms of what's actually super meta, pretty much it's just the Zenkethi Centaur, but it has nothing to do with the hangers. It's just because its layout itself, and in terms of its bridge offsetting and weapon layout, is super optimal for torpedo builds. These are all still fun to fly, mind you. I don't think they're insane, meta starships inherently. That's just my opinion. Obviously, a lot of these have unique and interesting hanger pets. So if you want to fly those hanger pets for fun, then by all means. Basically, anything is viable, but obviously some ships are better than others inside of this game. Our last part, we'll talk about science vessels. We have quite a bit less of these versus other ships inside of the game. So yeah, it's still pretty low. It's still really, really low. And also here in terms of specializations, as you can see here, we don't have very many. We've got a couple temper operative, a couple intel, and that's about it. When it comes to standard science vessels, their standard mastery package is 15% exotic damage, 10% shield HP, 10% hull and shield healing, and then extra shield regen per 6 seconds and extra shield resistance inherently on their ship, which is nice. Keep in mind, most science vessels unfortunately have this exact same mastery package. It would be nice if Cryptic varied it up a little bit and gave some ships some more extra offensive capabilities on them too. But maybe that's just me being nitpicking too much, and maybe it's because they just aren't putting enough thought into Commander Science vessels right now. But in terms of their raw stats, on average, they're a little bit lower on their hull. They're fine though; it's still not bad. 1.03 hull, 1.43 shields is still fine. With an average of a 13 turning and 53 inertia, 0.17 impulse, they're still fairly well rounded. It's just there's nothing particularly noteworthy in terms of this Starship subvariant. It's just an okay Starship. In here for noteworthy, we have the Sona Command Science Vessel, which is the only command science vessel in the game. We obviously have the Discovery Science Vessels, the Scryer, and then a bunch of temper operative ships, including the Glen, the cross-fashion Glen of the Voth Bastille, and the Fleet Nautilus are also pretty good, plus your exchange science vessels too are all pretty nice. And then from there, you've got a bunch of things from the exchange too. Because the thing of noteworthy things there is going to be the Tholian Iktomi for the improved Photonic Officer trait. So yeah, our next category is Science Destroyers and Science Spearheads. We only have 3 of these, if I recall correctly, from the next slide. Yep, just 3. All right, so for here, it's between 7 and 8 weapons available on the Starship. Spearheads just have 7. Destroyers can have up to 8 if they enable their tactical mode and disable the secondary deflector on the ship temporarily, or however long you want it to be. Mastery package is still going to be the exact same. In terms of the raw stats on it, it's still about what you would expect for a science vessel. It has a little bit higher hull though, and a little bit lower shields. And that's kind of what you're losing there, and you're losing a little bit of turning, but it's still not. But it's still a reasonable amount of turning, in my opinion. And Also, versus regular science vessels, you do get at least one extra weapon. Regular science vessels are just 6 weapons total, and these have at least 7 guaranteed. Up to 8 if you have a science destroyer and enable tactical mode. Really, the only downsides to these ships, and to be honest, the only downside is for newer players that have a science destroyer. A lot of times they get trolled because they're trying to use the tactical mode with Commander Tactical too much on their starship. It can become a cumbersome hindrance to a lot of newer players that say, hey, people like me are saying that science destroyers are really strong. I'm going to play one and go in tactical mode the whole time. For most people, I would just say, just stick with regular science mode. You go into tactical mode for some flavor, but you really should be sticking in science mode most of the time for a science destroyer and science spearhead. But that's just me. Obviously, people are making it work with Commander Tactical for some times during combat, but you should stick with just regular science. It's also why I've been telling Cryptic, and I keep on telling it, I'm not gonna stop. You need to add more science spearheads to the game. It's basically a science warship, but just under a different name, and that's what the ship is. And especially Cryptic needs to add a KDF science spearhead. If you don't want to add a science destroyer because that's too much, animation work, that's fine. Add a KDF science spearhead, and I will be happy. And I will stop ranting about this stuff in lots of my videos. When it comes to science dreadnoughts, they are another starship with 7 weapons, same mastery package as the other one, and they also have access to a hangar bay. Now, on paper, these should be better than science spearheads and science destroyers. They should be, just they have higher hull and lower turning. The problem is that all 4 of these ships currently in the game are pretty weak in terms of their actual bridge officer layout and console layout overall. So, well, besides the Crown Interact, which is it's in its own sphere of uniqueness, but the other 3 are all pretty weak, honestly. They're still fine. The Cardassian Science Dreadnought from the C Store is still a nice, durable science vessel that's pretty much a science spearhead, but it has abysmal turning for a science vessel. But they're still fine. If you want to fly one, you're more than welcome to. I would still recommend a different ship, though. When it comes to scout ships, again, another category that's fairly new to the game, and we don't have very many of them. This one actually has a different mastery package. We get some additional accuracy and some additional crit severity, which is nice and welcome. Scout ships are the most maneuverable science ships in the game, but again, it's in another category where you're significantly hurting in your overall durability to have that extra maneuverability on your starship. Additionally, with all other raiders in the game, generally speaking, outside of your commander seat, all the rest of your seats have universal seating. When it comes to raiders in general, if you have a commander universal seat, then you lose the ensign universal seat on your starship. That's been very consistent overall. These are our 3 scout ships in the game. We have the jellyfish for the other pilot ship that's not a tactical ship in the game, and then we have our 2 other scout ships. One from the fleet, the colony tier 5, and then one from a previous event. If you didn't earn it then it's very, very, very hard to access it now. When it comes to multi-mission science vessels, this is also another interesting situation versus average science vessels. The stats are actually really surprising to me. They have a regular mastery package, and they get a hangar bay. These are ships that are basically science dreadnoughts, but have 1 less weapon. And when you look at the actual stats and take out my bias behind it, the stats look bad. like, to be honest with you, the stats look bad. Everything is negative on this ship, which is surprising to me. I've always thought of these ships as, you know, some of the more durable ships in the game, and I'm still going to have that bias and hold that to be true. But you do need to still see that. You're more welcome to look at my Google spreadsheets to see if I'm wrong on this. But when you look at this, the raw stats, they should be lackluster to a lot of the science dreadnoughts. But again, science dreadnoughts are really weak, and several of these multi-mission science vessels are really strong, like the Sphere Builder ship, the Eternal, and Legendary Voyager are all good ships. So I'm like, do I really recommend at the end of this video to not use a multi-mission science vessel? I'm probably going to say they're still the best option if you don't have access. If you're a KDF captain, these are probably still your best option to use, frankly. But they should be really bad. And that's just what I'm saying here. With the stats right here of versus average, these ships should be bad. But they're relatively good and have a very good reputation in the community. So I will leave that at that and move on now. Our last category are our science carriers. This is our subcategory that does not have access to a secondary deflector. And they only have 6 weapons on them. Besides, of course, the Fekulari battle carrier, which has 7. That's in its own weird realm. We're only talking about tier 6 starships in this video, so that one's not going to be included. The loss of a secondary deflector is very, very bad. The fact that you lose that, sure, you have an extra hangar bay beyond what a multi-mission science vessel is giving you, but is a second hangar bay really worth losing the secondary deflector? That's what we have to really answer and think about this very critically. Not true. A lot of these carriers here do have some argument for their pets to be good. The Kelvin pets are, for all the Kelvin variants, have good pets. The Tholian's pets are really good for your support / nanny builds. The Cmdr pets aren't bad either, like the actual frigate ones. And then the Breen pets, if you have the Breen Raider alongside the Breen carrier, is actually probably one of, if not the best, frigates in the entire game for damage too. It's just the Fleet Jupiter that kind of sucks. Sorry, I just have to say it. But I think that's partly why we have so few of these ships. There's not a huge amount of demand for them because of this weakness right here. Without a secondary deflector, it feels bad to fly them. Again, I'll have another video when I talk about rebalancing classes that I'm going to give another option, so that you can lean more heavily on your pets to help your damage, and that it's not just, you know, your pets just autopiloting you to greatness inside of the game either. That you actually still have to be active and do things. But anyway, in terms of TLDR, here's the big Excel thing that I was copying from for a lot of the stuff throughout this video. There's all the engineering, tactical, and science stuff with the rough specialization things there. Still, just like the last video, it's still about a 40-40-20 split of about 40% engineering starships, 40% tactical, and a little bit less than 20% of them are science ships. Now, obviously, since this is a video focused more on the specializations than access to various factions for the different subtypes, we'll dive a little more into the actual subtypes. Now, 55% of endgame tier 6 starships do not have a commander specialization seat. So that's something to keep in mind. This is still something that is rare enough that like less than half of the tier 6 ships in the game have this. So with that said, the most common of the commander specialization seating is actually temper operative, and it's relatively equally represented among cruisers, tactical vessels, and science vessels too. I mean, you've got those 3 different options. You've got one for better maneuverability for tactical ships that are not as maneuverable. That's why you have so many of them in warships and destroyers. the engineering option for extra defense stuff with the cost of turning. If you're a tank, you're not going to care as much about that anyway. And then, of course, science, you've got the science option, which gives you extra exotic damage. So it's useful for all three, which is why I think you see it on all three of them. There was a lot less than that I was expecting for Temporal Operative for science, just because of how synergistic and good it is for science in general. But still, overall, it's still relatively good represented. Miracle Worker, even though it's not as prevalent in some of the other ones, it's probably still one of the best. Just because that extra console available to you, even if you can't use a specialization, it's still useful to everyone. Having an extra console is never a downside. Pilot is still mainly exclusive to escorts in the game, but a lot of people meme about this thing, and Pilot's probably not the most optimal, but it's definitely one of the most fun in terms of the commander specialist seedings to have on your ship. One of the most memes is that there are a lot of people who are wanting to have a pilot scimitar, just because the scimitar is one of the least maneuverable ships in the game. It's not the least maneuverable, it's just one of the most commonly seen least maneuverable starships in the game. Now, even though it's one of the oldest specializations, Commander Intel is actually one of the least commonly seen. And Command is also ties for second place there as well, and it's also about equally as old as Commander Intel. And I'll get to that in a slide in just a moment. In terms of cruisers to fly, flight deck carriers are the shining bright, clear favorite right now. Their stats are average, but their damage is still good. They can use any energy type in the game. They also have 2 hangar bays as well. So if you want to do raw damage, you want to do damage with your hangar pets, or if you want to tank with these things, they're useful and good in all those types of roles. Right behind them, battle cruisers, dreadnought cruisers, and standard cruisers are all decent in their own ways. I still think flight deck carriers are a bit better overall to more people inside the game. So in terms of a ship to fly, if you have easy access to a flight deck carrier, go ahead and fly one. Situationally, battle cruisers or dreadnought cruisers can be better. Like for instance, the Miracle Worker battle cruisers, some of the best DPS starships available from the fleet in general. So it's not that they're bad. Flight deck carriers are just more useful to more people. In terms of escorts, warships and destroyers are still the best, and it's stayed the same between the last video to this video. They're very well rounded, and a lot of specializations help to complement whatever weaknesses that a lot of them do have. They have the most offensive mastery, and as for escorts, the concept of picking a commander tactical is to do the most damage. Your mastery does not hinder you there either. So it's only if you have a starship that has better base stats or a better bridge officer seating than these ships is why you wouldn't pick one of those. With that being said, juggernauts are still very good for the high HP and still high damage. Directly escorts are still fine as well as standard escorts too. Raiders and dreadnought carriers are kind of the ones where I would not recommend initially going to those. They're still useful and still good. You just have to think about them a little bit differently than other ships. As for science vessels, well, science destroyers and science spearheads are still basically the best. They're well rounded. They have no real weaknesses besides the tactical mode gimmick of science destroyers, and that can troll a lot of newer players in the game into using that when they shouldn't. Even though the stats don't say it, because of the reputation behind multi-mission science vessels, and because of how good I felt flying them, and how good a lot of other people have felt flying them, I still think that they are the next best thing. Now, sure, there's a lot of strong new science vessels available. The Legendary Glenn is very good. Whether you consider that better than the Legendary Voyager, which is a multi-mission science vessel with Commander Miracle Worker, is up to you. I still think they're both fairly equal, but it's just me. Science dreadnoughts are fine as well. They do have higher HP to survive a little bit easier, but most of them kind of suck in terms of their bridge officer layout. Scout ships and science carriers both have extreme issues. Scout ships are very flimsy and can be blown up really easily. Science carriers don't even get a secondary deflector, so it's harder to actually get them to do damage, and so it's more of support playstyles that will actually use a science carrier. As for the TLDR, in my opinion, Commander Intel and Commander Command need to be buffed. They're both ones that are relatively rare inside the game. Commander Intel is the rarest commander specialization in the entire game, and people aren't asking for more. And it's been out for a very long time, and people aren't asking for more. And so that's like, come on, Cryptic, you need to think about a way to improve these more. The only things I really see this specialization used for primarily is override subsystem safeties, 1, 2, or 3, depending upon what your project makes it work for. And then as well, Intel team, if you're trying to get those people that are wanting to solo the elite TFOs inside the game. Intel team allows them to do that a little bit easier. Additionally, Commander Command is also fairly lackluster for a lot of players as well. Concentrate Firepower 3 is all you need for a lot of your DPS builds, for Torp builds. Rally Play Marker is all you really need for a lot of your tanking builds. Or if you really want Commander Command, Suppression Barrage 3 is pretty nice as well for energy-based tanking. But the rank up, that clicky that you get to use if you use enough abilities, it takes so long to use it, in my opinion, that most of your TFOs that are actually seriously trying to go for a lot of your DPS chasing stuff, by the time that you use it, the TFO is basically over. Or it's at a point where it's not going to matter too much whether you click that thing for your whole team or not. So maybe just a slight buff to make it be able to be used faster might be good enough. But Commander Intel, Cryptic, if you're listening right now, you really need to think about what Commander Intel is really supposed to be. Because enemies die too fast for a lot of the Commander Intel things to work properly. And honestly, a lot of people probably wouldn't mind if you ditched entirely what Commander Intel was supposed to give you, and if you just gave it something else. Initially, when I saw it, I thought, oh, this is supposed to be passively that you have a cloak, or you get a better cloak if you didn't have one, and then there's other cool gimmicks alongside it too. That's what was my initial impression of it. Perhaps there's something else that I'm not seeing, but I think it does need to be addressed. When it comes to the actual starships themselves, flight deck carriers are really strong. After their changes of getting an extra hangar and access to dual cannons, they are very strong, to the point that other carriers probably need buffs now to be competitive. We still don't have a pilot cruiser yet in the game, so it'd be nice to have one of those too. Again, we don't have a Federation or Romulan Dreadnought carrier, and we don't have a Federation or KDF Juggernaut yet. It'd be cool if we would get one of those eventually as well. Science vessels do need the most work though. We don't have any KDF spearheads or science destroyers. KDF really needs one at this point. We still don't have a tier 6 KDF science carrier either. That still hasn't changed from the last video. I'm still going to keep it here. And as well, we need more faction science dreadnoughts. If they got a little bit of a buff as well, that would be nice. But at the bare minimum, it'd be nice if we got some faction-oriented science dreadnoughts too. Even if it was a C-store only type of science dreadnought, that would be fine with me. But anyway, that's basically it for this video. Hopefully that was interesting for you all. I did this video now, even though it wasn't in my posts on Facebook, just because I realized when I was gonna start recording for the video My Dream KDF and Romulan Republic anniversary bundles, that I was going to talk about some stuff about how I would want to actually buff the carrier subclasses. When I was talking about the carriers that would be added in those bundles, but I was like, that's going to take too long for me to explain. If I'm going to do one of those videos, that coming out of the blue without me talking about, well, how are the subclasses right now inside the game? And so I was like, all right, let's make 2 more videos and in preparation for that particular video. So y'all might know what's coming up in the next 2 or 3 videos on this channel. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Again, feel free to let me know how the audio was for this video. I have made some adjustments and moved things around in my apartment, so hopefully it's a little bit better than the last time. Last time was super haphazard. This time I've gotten more settled, so it should be a little bit easier to adjust things now. But yeah, I'm still getting some things organized. And of course, there's the current thing that you might see in the news right now that my job is partly addressing, but I'll probably stop there, or we'll be addressing. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and enjoy the rest of your week.